January 7th, we all knew that there were going to be high winds expected in the afternoon. And I think for people that have lived in the Pasadena area for a number of years, they experienced something very similar to this in 2011. And I had a tree, lose a limb and hit my house during that experience. And so I think everyone kind of expected something very similar to that. And when the fire broke out, my children were at an appointment in the evening, and my wife noticed it outside. And she pulled my kids in from their appointment, and they came home right away. And for the next several hours, we were just glued to the TV and glued to social media to figure out what was going on. There was a lot of disinformation out there. I think everyone got very familiar with the app Watch Duty. We kept seeing the evacuation areas trickle down south from Altadena, all the way down to PCC, because no one knew what the extent of the fire was going to be. I swept floors on the weekend. My father painted apartments when he was a kid for his dad. And so I think because of that upbringing, there's a tremendous amount of respect that I have for the sole proprietor, the small business owner. We're not talking about, the small business definition is like 50 and under, but it's really, in Altadena and Pasadena, the small business I consider the under 5 employee, under the 10 employee. Those are the small businesses that they're really special, that make the streets really dynamic, that make the community a place you want to be and to invest in. I've had the benefit in my career to work with very big companies, but also very small companies. And for me, helping a husband and wife business it means more to me than to work for a large corporation or help a large corporation, because they're investing on the ground in the community, and they're going to be there for a while because they live in the community, they're part of the community. And I think that it's just what makes our area very special. The first thing I thought when the fire broke out was, what's going to be the impact on the community? What businesses are going to be impacted, both physically and then also long term? And I was very afraid that the community was going to lose a sense of place, because if you look at the numbers, and the numbers tell one story, but it's really the personal stories that are not reflected in the numbers itself. But the numbers are devastating. We're talking about 50% of all structures in Altadena completely destroyed. For commercial buildings themselves, it was about 100 buildings in total that were destroyed. 125 that either were destroyed or were impacted directly. The LA County Economic Development Corporation did a survey and issued a report saying that some 743 businesses were impacted by the Eaton Fire alone. So that doesn't include the Palisades. And when you think about how many small businesses are in Altadena, it's a staggering number. And it's not only the restaurants that have a very outward-facing appearance, you can see a coffee shop that you visit and buy coffee from. It's the small businesses that people run out of their homes. There were a number of musicians in Altadena that lost equipment, studios, etc. Artists that were making stuff in their garages, or they had space somewhere else. It's staggering. And not only that is the number of people that lived in Altadena but had businesses in Pasadena, that maybe their business wasn't physically impacted because their business was located in Playhouse Village or Old Pasadena, but they lost their homes, and that impacts the whole entire community. There is a still fear that it's going to take a massive amount of resources and time to rebuild such a wonderful place. Based on what I've seen, the most conservative numbers say that areas that are impacted by the Eaton Fire or Palisades Fire will not return to full restoration until 2034. That's the very conservative number. There are some figures that say businesses can recover faster. We're talking about a year, year and a half. Who knows what will actually happen? You know, it's the barbershop that's still standing, but half of their clientele is gone, moved somewhere else. And so they're still in business, but they don't know what they're going to do. And so it's a real concern. And I think there's so many unknowns at this point, and we're recording this in May, and there still isn't a direction that we kind of know where things stand. For people that are local, and even people that aren't in the area, if you're local, take a moment to take a drive up through Altadena. Go up Lake Avenue, drive down Altadena Drive or Mariposa, go down Fair Oaks, and see the impact that the fire still has on our community, and the impact the fire will have on our community for a very long time. Unfortunately, so many people have kind of moved on because they've had to. If they haven't been directly impacted, they've kind of moved on to something else. And it's important that people remember that there are families that have lost businesses, there are families that have lost loved ones, and they're dealing with this every day, and this loss every day. And so we need to be reminded almost every day that this community needs support and will need support for a very long time. Altadena and Pasadena is very special because of its local ties. Even in Old Pasadena, which was not impacted directly by the fires, you never know if the business owner had lost their home, and there's so many instances of that. And so it becomes even more important that we go to restaurants locally, we go to stores locally, and we seek out small businesses. There were so many small businesses in Altadena, in Pasadena, that following the fires were involved in collecting goods for people, that were doing donation pickups, drop-offs. There's a store in Old Pasadena that almost like a quarter of their store, they dedicate a quarter of their store for collection of clothes and goods. And even though that person and that business wasn't impacted, their clientele was impacted, their friends were impacted. And it becomes critical that we support businesses that have shown love to Altadena, and that will continue to show love to Altadena and all the people that have been impacted by the Eaton Fire. Altadena has a large percentage of older residents. It's unique in that from the Palisades, it has an older demographic and then a very younger demographic too. So it's got children, but it's got older people as well. And you saw the impact of the fires on convalescent homes or elderly care facilities. And from what my understanding is that those kind of care facilities will take an extremely long amount of time to rebuild. One report said that a specialized care facility will take 900 days to build because of the permitting process in a facility like that. I think Altadena is going to slowly rebuild those facilities, but it's going to take a very long time. And in the interim, Altadena will lose a number of elderly residents to different areas. They'll have to seek assistance and housing elsewhere. Altadena, like Pasadena, has a large number of religious organizations, churches, temples that are greatly impacted by the Eaton Fire. There are, on Altadena Drive, for just example, there are 2 churches that burned across from each other, and then one that was next to another one that survived. But those communities, those parishes, and the worshipers have had to relocate. Churches have had to be hosted by other churches, Eagle Rock, San Gabriel Valley, and those parishes have had to relocate. And I'm incredibly grateful to that charity, and it shows to the strength of those communities that they welcome other people in. But it is going to be a challenge to keep these communities intact, because a parish or a temple, they had a congregation, and that congregation has been displaced because the families have been displaced so far. We're seeing families not only in like La Cañadas, Pasadena, but they've been scattered. We're talking about all over the San Gabriel Valley, if not someplace else, or they've decided to relocate to another community or out of state. So a lot of these faith-based organizations and churches will see an impact for a long time. But I'm really confident in the leadership of these organizations to continue their communities kind of going forward. And that also extends to the number of schools that have been impacted. There are a number of private schools that were impacted, that burned completely, charter schools that were impacted, public schools as well. So, and each of those schools has had to make accommodations and pivot in a way that's been tremendous to see. Some of the schools have relocated their classes to different schools in the San Gabriel Valley. You've seen schools relocate students to nonprofit organizations. Some schools have been relocated to boys and girls clubs, for example. And again, it goes back to the creativity of leadership to find a solution. There were schools that were burned, that were destroyed, that they had students backing some kind of class within weeks. And that goes to the incredible leadership that was shown during COVID and the lessons that were learned during that experience, that they were able to figure out how to support their children. As a father of young children that have gone through COVID and now the Eaton Fire, I'm impressed and I'm encouraged by school leadership of all different schools to serve their children's interests and their students' interests, because they know the impact that being in a classroom, being with friends, creating stability is the best way for children to weather the storm that we're going through. Altadena is unique in that there isn't like a central square to the area, and people forget that it is unincorporated Los Angeles County. During the response, I think people that didn't know the area, when Pasadena's police chief would speak or the fire chief would speak, they thought they were speaking for Altadena as well, and they were not. But going back to kind of the business areas, there are kind of corridors that serve Altadena and Pasadena. Lake Avenue, you mentioned, Fair Oaks, Mariposa, and they're each individual. They have their own characteristics, they have their own vibe, and it kind of makes it really fun. Lake Avenue is very different than Fair Oaks, and Mariposa is kind of in between. It's this very small block that has an incredible amount of character. It's really, really fun, and half of that block, for example, was destroyed from a commercial standpoint. So even on using Mariposa as an example, as a micro example, half the block has been destroyed, but the rest of the block that survived, those businesses can't survive. So they've had to, I know that there's a couple instances where small businesses that had stores have gone back to the home business, for example, and they don't know when they're going to reopen. One, from standpoint, is their store safe enough for them to return from a physical standpoint? And then two, are there enough customers that would come to the store as a destination? Lake Avenue, kind of around the corner, you saw El Patron, Mexican restaurant on Altadena and Lake Avenue. That business survived and they just reopened, but around them is devastation. So everyone was very excited that they reopened, and that because they're kind of a fixture in that area. But all the houses north of that are gone. So the patrons of that restaurant are going to be very different kind of going forward. And the hope is that the construction crews and the remediation crews will support these businesses in the interim until people can start rebuilding. Kind of on the east side, I know two businesses that, one was a florist, a well-known florist in the area, and talking to the business owner on Valentine's Day, you know, her business went from about 25,000 to about 5,000 year over year. And so ultimately they had to kind of abandon or kind of give up their storefront and then going back to the home business. And then there's another example of an ice cream shop where they lost inventory and it basically destroyed their storefront because they were out of power for so long. And they have yet to reopen. And they were kind of a fixture of that area for a long time. From my understanding, business interruption insurance is very hard to get, and if you get it, it's very costly. And so small businesses especially rely on the support of their communities, and their customer base is returning. You know, we're talking about businesses that have lost half plus of their business, you know, essentially overnight. We're talking about businesses in Altadena. It's kind of a mix of ages. So you had older businesses, younger businesses. And so for older businesses, it's how do you start over when you're in your 50s, 60s, 70s? It's really difficult. But it's all the more important that in the next 6 months, next 6 years, that people are more proactive in seeking out businesses that they can support, that give back to Altadena and are committed to rebuilding this area. From my personal standpoint, our insurance will be up in a couple months, so we'll feel the first impact of the Eaton Fire and the Palisades Fire on our insurance. For most people, we've seen the government, LA County, create permitting offices, kind of speed up the permitting process. And I think that's been a positive impact. But I think it's just too early to tell long-term what the insurance companies will do because I think their State Farm got permission to raise rates by 17 to 30%. And they're a big carrier. I think they were projecting a loss of $7 billion in the state of California. And LA County is obviously greatly impacted economically. And I think there is a desire to rebuild quickly. But it is LA County, and it's a large organization, and Altadena is an unincorporated area. They have a wonderful town council that are tremendous advocates for their area. I know several that have lost their homes personally. For rebuilding, I think it's going to be grassroots focused. It's going to be at the county level. I think that even though we drive through the area and we see Army Corps of Engineers, we can't rely on Sacramento. We can't rely on Washington, D.C. as much as we have in the past. I think it starts at the town council level. It starts at the county level, and then the City of Los Angeles as well to support. But I think it's going to be a grassroots effort. I think that the reality is that there's going to be a large economic impact on Altadena, and we're going to see a number of businesses that we're used to seeing go away. And I think it's going to require that businesses get creative. I was talking to a barber, and again, his clientele has gone away, and he was thinking, well, maybe he can have a van and not have a storefront anymore. So I think that facing challenges, I think businesses are incredibly gifted at changing direction and overcoming obstacles. But with that still is heartbreak and devastation. And I think we need to keep that in mind going forward, that every dollar that we invest in a business is a dollar that we're making our community better. And that's critically important for us now and always. We spend so much money at Target and Amazon, and there aren't really businesses that kind of compete in Altadena or Pasadena. However, if there is an opportunity to buy a gift, or if there's an opportunity to go out to eat, seek out a restaurant in Altadena, Pasadena. Seek out a store that has gone underground into their garage. Buy something online from them. We didn't really know what to do. There were so many of us that were in shock. And I'm very fortunate that my business and my home weren't affected directly. My children lost their school, but it wasn't a situation where we had a direct loss. And there were so many people that wanted to do something and not knowing what to do. And coming from like a business standpoint, I didn't see an organization or a list out there that showed the number of businesses that were impacted, a list, and if they had GoFundMe pages, because all of a sudden GoFundMe exploded on Instagram and social media, TikTok, and no one knew kind of who was out there, what they were asking for. And so I tried to kind of come up with a list of businesses and schools that were impacted, and with links to GoFundMe pages. And I thought that was the bare minimum of what we should just kind of be doing, just keeping track. And I think that list has been kind of taken over by more formal organizations and the cities and counties and stuff like that. So I'm glad that continues, but I don't think that there's still a link to GoFundMe pages that are still ongoing. There's some businesses that met their goals really quickly. There are other businesses that are at 30%, still. And I don't know if they'll ever get the resources that they need. And we're talking about businesses that employ one person, but also businesses that employ 5 people. And what happens to those employees? They're not the business owner, they're an employee. They might have lost their home. And Altadena's demographic is really interesting in that it relies on kind of local and then outside workplaces. And so because of that, I think we need more investment from the community to support itself, but then also Pasadena, La Cañada, San Marino, all the communities around it need to pay more attention and see how they can support the community and rebuild it. There are many nonprofits that are run from homes, especially in this area. And I think there's the collective that they created that brought together 200 some organizations. And it shows you how diverse and how involved the community is to bring all these people together. The challenge will be to have a united voice with all those different organizations that have a different segment and a different concentration and focus, because all those focuses are incredibly important, but brought together, some of those things can get lost. And I think it's going to be a challenge for organizations that are smaller. You think about the more formal 501c3s that are established, that have a formal leadership board and all that kind of stuff. They're going to be able to weather the storm a lot easier. But the smaller single-person, 5-person nonprofit that volunteer on the weekends, it's going to be a challenge because they're fighting for attention, they're fighting for funds, and I know there are a lot of opportunities out there for grants and things like that, but at some point that money is going to dry up, and they're going to have to go and seek some financial support. I know a landscape contractor pretty well, and he lost his home and his business, so he lost all of his equipment, his truck, and within a week or two of the fire, they had their guys on site doing things for their clients. And it just shows you the tremendous resources that business owners and homeowners have been able to pull together. And their resilience is just, it's awe-inspiring. It really is. We're talking about, like, for this one contractor that I know, they didn't miss a beat. Even though they now lived someplace else and their clients, they wanted to serve their clients. And that's amazing, and I don't know how formal like a contractor like that would be. They might be, who knows what kind of formation they have, but I know that there are construction companies that kind of like home-based construction builders and things like that. And I don't know what's going to happen to that structure or kind of how they operate. The industries that we might see benefiting from it, it's really construction and remediation. And unfortunately, if you drive through the streets, all you see is construction crews, remediation crews. And so there are a number of construction companies in Altadena, small businesses in Altadena. If the opportunity presents itself, I hope that those businesses will continue to stay local, concentrate on the remediation and the rebuilding of the community. To all the people in Altadena and Pasadena that have lost their businesses or been impacted one way or the other, I think the message that is important to me to remember is that they're not alone. And they know this better than anyone because the business next door was impacted. Their customer that they've known for 20 years has been impacted. They know they're not alone, but they still need support. And to each and every one of them, the community of Altadena and the community of Pasadena and the larger San Gabriel Valley loves them. And there are instances where some businesses will not return, that they'll close, unfortunately. But we as a community will be there to help them rebuild in whatever way we can. Everyone in our community has been impacted in one way, shape, or another. And we've all been touched by a resident, a business owner, a first responder that has gone above and beyond to serve our community and to keep it safe. That goes for the firefighters and paramedics that are on the front line fighting the fires that evening and the days following. That goes to medical staff at Huntington Hospital or other hospitals in the San Gabriel Valley. There are so many people that have emerged throughout this crisis that have shown tremendous strength and determination to serve others. And it inspires me, it inspires all the San Gabriel Valley, and I hope it inspires the next generation of children that will seek opportunities and careers serving others in Pasadena and return to Pasadena to serve others.